Hello everyone, and welcome back to our channel. I trust you are all in excellent spirits today. We have a truly intriguing case for you, one that exercised my dear friend Hercule Poirot's formidable little grey cells quite thoroughly. It involves deceit, secrets, and a most perplexing lady whose life, it seemed, was woven from half-truths and calculated omissions. This is a story that will take us through the bustling thoroughfares and gaslit alleys of London, revealing the hidden currents beneath its polished surface. It's a tale that promises to keep you guessing until the very end, and I sincerely hope you will enjoy the journey. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more adventures with Monsieur Poirot. Now let's begin with the first chapter of The Lady Who Lied Twice. Chapter 1. The Stillness in the Drawing Room. It was a typically dreary November morning in London, the kind that promised an entire day, veiled in a persistent drizzle, when the telephone in Poirot's modest Whitehaven Mansions flat trilled with an urgency that pierced the calm of our breakfast. I, Captain Arthur Hastings, had just finished buttering my toast, while Poirot meticulously arranged his boiled egg in its silver cup, a ritual of precision that no domestic crisis could ever disrupt. "Ah, Hastings, the call of duty, no doubt," he remarked, without looking up as I reached for the receiver. His ears, it seemed, were as finely tuned to the subtle vibrations of fate as they were to the nuances of human speech. It was Chief Inspector Japp, his voice gruff with a familiar weariness that spoke volumes of a morning already complicated. A respectable lady, Mrs. Rosalind Thorne, had been found lifeless in her elegant drawing-room in Belgravia. The initial assessment suggested natural causes, but a nagging detail, Japp confessed, had pricked his professional conscience. He required Poirot's unique perspective. Within the hour, we were being ushered into the hushed grandeur of Mrs. Thorne's residence. The air within was thick with the scent of lilies and the unspoken questions that clung to every polished surface. The drawing-room itself was a picture of refined taste, velvet drapes drawn against the grey light, antique furniture arranged with an eye for comfort and grace, and a faint, almost imperceptible aroma of almonds lingering. Mrs. Rosalind Thorne lay collapsed on a chaise lounge, a silk shawl draped delicately across her. Her expression was serene, almost peaceful, though a faint, almost imperceptible pallor had settled upon her features. There were no signs of struggle, no overturned objects, nothing overtly to suggest violence. The scene bespoke a sudden, quiet end. Japp, a man of practical deductions, gestured around. "See, Poirot, quiet as a church mouse. The doctor says heart failure, but her maid, Agnes, mentioned something peculiar. Mrs. Thorne told her she was going to a charity committee meeting yesterday afternoon, but Agnes distinctly saw her leave in a closed carriage, heading in entirely the opposite direction from the specified venue, towards the East End, if she wasn't mistaken." Poirot, however, was not examining the victim. His eyes, keen and ceaseless, scoured the room. He noted the meticulously arranged flowers in a crystal vase, a profusion of white roses, save for a single vivid purple orchid nestled amongst them, quite out of place. His gaze lingered on a small, exquisitely carved wooden box on a side table, its lid slightly ajar, as if someone had hastily closed it. He picked up a discarded teacup, inhaling its faint scent, then placed it down with a click. "Ah, Japp, you perceive the contradiction, yes?" Poirot's voice was soft, almost a murmur, yet it held the weight of an accusation. A lady of Mrs. Thorne's standing, known for her impeccable rectitude, tells her staff one thing, yet does another, and towards the East End. Most unusual for a charity function in Belgravia. He tapped his forehead. "The little grey cells, they begin to stir, mon ami. This orchid, for instance, a curious choice for a room of such understated elegance. And the scent. I detect not only lilies and almonds, but something else, something fainter, almost metallic perhaps. I looked closer at the orchid. It was indeed a striking splash of color, almost too vibrant for the room's otherwise muted palette. "Perhaps a gift, Poirot?" I offered, ever the practical one. Poirot merely hummed, his expression unreadable. Perhaps, or perhaps a message. Mrs. Thorne, it seems, lived a life of precise order, yet in her final hours there are these dissonances. A carefully constructed facade, perhaps, with something quite different hidden behind it. He turned to Jap. "We must ascertain where Mrs. Thorne truly went yesterday afternoon. The direction alone is a clue. And who, pray tell, might have had cause for her to depart from the truth?" Jap sighed, scratching his chin. Well, she was a widow. Lived alone apart from the staff. No immediate family to speak of, apart from a rather disreputable brother and a distant cousin. Highly respected in society, though. Poirot gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. "Precisely, Jap. Highly respected, which makes the untruth all the more significant. One does not lie for trifles, known? Mrs. Rosalind Thorne, I suspect, had something to hide, and someone, it seems, was quite keen to ensure her secrets remained buried." He picked up the tiny, half-opened wooden box again, running a finger along its intricate carving. "This box, Hastings, it holds nothing but air, yet its presence here feels deliberate, almost staged." The stillness in the drawing-room suddenly felt less peaceful and more like the heavy silence that precedes a storm. Poirot's gaze, sharp and penetrating, seemed to peel back the layers of polite society, revealing the darker currents beneath. Our investigation into Mrs. Rosalind Thorne's last hours, and indeed her last lie, had just begun. Chapter 2. Of Petals and Poker Faces. Poirot's keen interest in the purple orchid led us, the very next morning, through the bustling, vibrant chaos of Covent Garden's flower market. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth, fresh blooms, and the boisterous calls of vendors, a stark contrast to the hushed drawing-room we had left behind. Rain-slicked cobblestones reflected the grey sky, and the chatter of merchants mingled with the distant peal of church bells. "Ah, Hastings, observe the symphony of life," Poirot declared, navigating the throng with surprising agility for a man of his compact stature. "Each stall a miniature kingdom, each bloom a silent declaration, but we seek a specific note in this orchestral arrangement. We were looking for Miss Evangeline Croft, Mrs. Thorne's longtime companion and the proprietor of a small, rather charming flower stall tucked away in a quieter corner of the market. Miss Croft was a woman in her late 50s, with kind, though somewhat weary, eyes and hands stained green from a lifetime among plants. She seemed genuinely distraught by Mrs. Thorne's passing. "Poor Rosalind," she murmured, arranging a bouquet of freesias with automatic grace. "It's such a shock. She was always so vivacious, though perhaps a little more subdued these past few months." Poirot's eyes, however, fixed on a cluster of rare orchids, strikingly similar to the one found in Mrs. Thorne's drawing-room, though these were fresh and vibrant. "Miss Croft," he began, his voice gentle, "you sell these particular orchids, I observe. Paphiopedilum rothschildianum. Are they not? Rather exotic for a common market stall." Miss Croft's brow furrowed. "Indeed, Monsieur Poirot. A special order, usually. They're terribly difficult to cultivate. Mrs. Thorne adored them. She insisted on having them for her drawing-room, even if they cost a small fortune. She told me she had a meeting of great importance, where she wished to make a particular impression." "And when was this, Miss Croft?" Poirot pressed. "The day before." "The day she passed," Miss Croft replied, her voice catching. She was quite insistent, said she was meeting a Mr. Silas Grimshaw, an art dealer. Something about a family heirloom she wished to have appraised, though I couldn't imagine why. Rosalind was hardly in need of funds. The mention of an art dealer and an heirloom immediately piqued Poirot's interest, especially considering the empty, intricately carved wooden box he had seen. An art dealer, you say, and she mentioned nothing else of this meeting, or perhaps of a journey to the East End. Miss Croft looked puzzled. The East End? No, certainly not. She spoke only of Mr. Grimshaw and this antique piece. She was quite secretive about it, which was unlike her. Perhaps she was trying to surprise someone. As we left the market, Poirot mused. So Miss Croft tells us of an art dealer and an heirloom. Yet the maid saw her heading east. Two conflicting accounts already. The first lie, Hastings, begins to unravel. He then made a detour, not back to Belgravia, but towards St. James's, a district of formidable club houses and hushed, velvet-lined interiors. Our destination was the prestigious Centurion Club, a bastion of old-money London. Here we sought Mr. Julian Blackwood, Mrs. Thorne's estranged younger brother. The club itself was a study in staid opulence, leather armchairs, a roaring fire, and the pervasive scent of old cigars and port. Mr. Blackwood was a man with a perpetually flushed face and a nervous twitch in his left eye, nursing a brandy in a secluded corner. He was a known dilettante, prone to unfortunate business ventures and a general air of dissipation. Rosalind? Oh, quite a shock, yes. Rather sudden, but then she always was a bit delicate beneath that iron will. He slurred slightly, clearly having started his day's drinking early. Always meddling in things, thinking she knew best. She never approved of my ventures, you see. Thought them vulgar or unseemly. Did your sister mention anything of an art dealer, Mr. Blackwood, or a family heirloom? Poirot asked, his gaze unwavering. Blackwood gave a dismissive wave. Heirlooms? Good heavens, she had a house full of them, but nothing truly valuable, I assure you. Our family fortune, such as it was, dwindled generations ago, thanks to some rather spectacularly bad investments by our great-uncle. Rosalind was always trying to sell some trinket or another to keep up appearances, I suspect. But an art dealer? No, unless it was some new romantic folly. She always was prone to those, despite her age. A hopeless romantic, our Rosalind. Poirot's eyes narrowed fractionally. Romantic folly? What do you mean by that, monsieur? Blackwood smirked, a rather unpleasant expression. Oh, nothing concrete, you understand. Just whispers. She was seen, now and then, in rather unusual company for a lady of her standing. Younger men, aspiring types. Perhaps she was indulging in some late-life escapade. He took a large gulp of brandy. She always did have a penchant for the dramatic. As we left the club, the fog had begun to roll in from the Thames, softening the sharp edges of the buildings, casting an air of mystery over the city. Poirot adjusted his hat. So, Hastings, the plot thickens, yes? A respectable lady, a secret meeting with an art dealer, a journey to the East End, whispers of romantic folly, and a potentially dwindling fortune. Everyone seems to have a different version of Mrs. Thorne, or at least of her recent activities. Her life, it appears, was a tapestry woven with many threads, some of them rather contradictory, and the truth, like a persistent fog, is obscuring much from our view. He tapped his cane thoughtfully. Mr. Blackwood's insinuation of romantic folly is interesting, Hastings. Perhaps the art dealer was merely a cover, another layer to our lady's twice-told tales. We must follow this thread, however faint. Chapter 3. Whispers by the Tracks. The next day dawned with a chilling, pervasive fog that clung to every brick and lamp-post, making the gaslight glow diffuse and spectral. It was the perfect atmosphere for secrets and hushed conversations, and Poirot, ever attuned to the symbolism of his surroundings, found it most fitting for our continued inquiries. Our first stop was a quaint, bustling tea-room not far from Charing Cross Station, a place Mrs. Thorne was known to frequent. The aroma of freshly brewed tea and warm scones provided a comforting counterpoint to the gloom outside. Poirot, with his usual knack for observation, immediately spotted a young waitress, Clara, who seemed to remember her customers with an almost photographic memory. "Mrs. Thorne, you say?" Clara mused, wiping down a marble-topped table. "Oh, yes, a lovely lady. Always ordered Darjeeling with a slice of lemon. She came in quite regularly. Usually alone, but sometimes she'd meet someone here." "And who might that be, mademoiselle?" Poirot asked, his eyes twinkling. Clara hesitated, blushing slightly. "Well, sometimes it was a gentleman. Not an older, respectable type like her, if you understand. He was younger, perhaps in his late 20s, early 30s. Quite handsome, with a serious air about him. He always carried a small leather-bound notebook. Seemed to be writing." "An art dealer, perhaps, mademoiselle?" I ventured. Clara shook her head firmly. "Oh, no, Captain. He looked more like a poet or a scholar. He'd often read books while waiting. They seemed to have quite intense conversations, but always kept their voices low. Never saw him again after the news came out." Poirot gave Clara a warm, appreciative smile. "Thank you, mademoiselle. Your observations are most illuminating." As we left the tea room, Poirot adjusted his scarf. "So, Hastings, the art dealer, becomes a young writer or a scholar. Mr. Blackwood's romantic folly gains a certain credibility, does it not? A woman of Mrs. Thorne's age and standing, secretly meeting a younger man. It adds another layer to her carefully constructed life." Our next destination was Charing Cross Station itself, a cavernous space filled with the echoing sounds of steam trains, hurried footsteps, and shouted farewells. The fog swirled into the vast hall, catching in the beams of light filtering through the grimy roof. Poirot had a particular interest in the railway station. "The maid, Agnes, recalled Mrs. Thorne heading east," Poirot explained. "Charing Cross offers connections eastward, does it not? Perhaps Mrs. Thorne was not merely travelling towards the East End, but through it to somewhere beyond." We spoke to a grizzled old porter, Thomas, who had seen countless faces pass through these arches over the decades. He squinted at a small photograph of Mrs. Thorne we carried. I remember her," Thomas rasped, chewing on a matchstick. "A regular face she was, about a month or two back. Always catching the early afternoon train to Canterbury. Not always, mind you, but often enough that I recognized her. She usually looked a bit anxious, if you ask me, and always carried a small satchel clutched tight." "To Canterbury," I exclaimed. "But that's a significant journey. Why would she go to Canterbury and tell her maid she was attending a charity meeting in London?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Precisely, Hastings. The destination, it is specific. Canterbury, a city steeped in history, yes? Perhaps a past connection, a hidden life away from the London society. And the small satchel, clutched tight. What might it contain, I wonder? Not charity notes, I hazard." He produced a folded train ticket from his waistcoat pocket, which he had subtly retrieved from Mrs. Thorne's drawing-room earlier, a single, unused ticket to Canterbury, dated for the day of her demise. It was a detail Japp's men had overlooked, dismissing it as irrelevant. "This, Hastings," Poirot declared, holding up the ticket with the air of a conjurer revealing his trick, "is where the second lie becomes tangible. She planned to leave London on the very day she died. Why the secrecy? Why the detour through the East End, as her maid suggested? And why, ultimately, did she not use this ticket?" The fog outside seemed to press in closer, and the mournful whistle of a departing train echoed through the vast station. Poirot tapped the unused ticket. "Canterbury holds a secret, Hastings. A secret that Mrs. Thorne wished to retrieve, or perhaps to bury once and for all. And someone, it seems, knew of this secret and took steps to ensure she never reached her destination." The image of Mrs. Thorne, a woman of refined elegance, anxiously clutching a satchel and boarding a train to a distant city, painted a very different picture from the serene widow Japp had initially described. Her carefully constructed facade was crumbling, revealing layers of desperate intent. The journey, Hastings, is as important as the destination. What did she hope to find in Canterbury? And who might benefit from her never getting there? Poirot murmured, a profound thoughtfulness settling upon his features. The pieces, they are beginning to arrange themselves, but the picture, it remains fragmented. Chapter 4. Shadows by the Thames. The trail of the mysterious art dealer, Mr. Silas Grimshaw, led us far from the gas-lit elegance of Belgravia and the bustling arteries of central London. We ventured into the grimy, labyrinthine docklands along the Thames, a district of towering warehouses, narrow cobbled alleys, and the omnipresent smell of damp river mud and coal smoke. The air was thick with a grey industrial haze, and the mournful cries of gulls wheeled overhead, their calls echoing between the brick buildings. "Ah, Hastings, the underbelly of commerce," Poirot announced, picking his way carefully over slippery flagstones. "Where respectable goods meet questionable provenance, a fitting stage for our next act." Mr. Silas Grimshaw's establishment was tucked away at the end of a particularly desolate alley, a dilapidated brick warehouse with peeling paint and a sagging sign that simply read, "Grimshaw Antiquities, Restoration and Appraisal." The interior was a chaotic jumble of forgotten treasures and neglected artifacts, illuminated by a single bare electric bulb that cast long, dancing shadows. The dust motes danced in the gloom, and the air was heavy with the scent of varnish, old wood, and something faintly chemical. Mr. Grimshaw himself was a gaunt, stooped man with spectacles perched precariously on his nose, his fingers stained with various pigments. He looked up from a delicate restoration project, his eyes, sharp and intelligent despite his disheveled appearance, peering at us from behind thick lenses. "Poirot, you say, and Captain Hastings?" he croaked, his voice raspy. "What brings you to my humble abode? Unless, of course, you've discovered a hidden masterpiece in your attic." He gave a dry, humorless cough. "We are here regarding Mrs. Rosalind Thorne," Poirot stated, cutting to the chase. "We understand she had an appointment with you recently, concerning a family heirloom." Grimshaw's already pale face seemed to lose a shade more color. "Ah, Mrs. Thorne. A sad business, that. Yes, she did come to me. She brought in a rather curious piece. A small, intricately carved wooden box, not unlike one you might find in an old curiosity shop. 18th century, possibly a snuff box, but it was unusually heavy for its size." "The very box I observed in her drawing room," Poirot interjected, his gaze piercing. "Empty, if I recall." Grimshaw nodded slowly. "Indeed, it was empty when she brought it to me, too. She was convinced it was a fake, a clever reproduction. She wanted me to confirm its inauthenticity, and perhaps even to dispose of it discreetly. She was rather insistent it had no value, apart from a sentimental one. But you believed otherwise?" Poirot probed, his eyes gleaming. Grimshaw hesitated, polishing his spectacles with a cloth. "Let's just say, Monsieur Poirot, that some fakes are more interesting than the genuine articles. This box had a certain craftsmanship, the carving, the type of wood. It hinted at something more. I was still examining it carefully. I hadn't yet given her my full appraisal. She seemed rather desperate, though she tried to hide it. Talked about unforeseen expenses and obligations. Hardly what one would expect from a lady of her apparent means." This revelation aligned with Mr. Blackwood's earlier comment about Mrs. Thorne trying to maintain appearances despite dwindling funds. The pieces were beginning to fit, though into a very different mosaic than first imagined. "Did Mrs. Thorne mention anything else?" Poirot asked. "Perhaps a journey to Canterbury, or a particular interest in old family histories?" Grimshaw pondered. "She did mention something about a trip to Canterbury. Yes, to consult an old family solicitor regarding some distant relation's will." and she seemed quite distressed, saying something about needing to put things right before it was too late. Poirot's eyes narrowed. And she tried to convince you this antique box was worthless. Grimshaw chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. Oh, yes. Almost too much, if you ask me. Made me suspect it was quite the opposite. People don't usually try so hard to convince you something is worthless unless they know it holds a secret of some kind. I advised her to be cautious, told her not to sell it quickly. She was to come back for my full report, but she never did. As we made our way back through the grimy streets, the river wind whistling around us, Poirot was deep in thought. So, Hastings, the heirloom is not a fake, but quite the reverse. Mrs. Thorne, it seems, was not only concealing her financial difficulties, but actively trying to mislead Mr. Grimshaw about the value of an antique box. Why? To sell it at a lower price, or to keep its true significance hidden? He tapped his cane on the cobblestones. And the Canterbury connection solidifies. A family solicitor, a will, putting things right. It suggests a significant legal matter, perhaps concerning her own inheritance or, more interestingly, an undiscovered heir. The empty box, the journey to Canterbury, the young writer. All these threads are beginning to weave into a complex pattern. Someone, I feel, knew the true value of that box and the secret it contained, and someone was desperate to ensure Mrs. Thorne did not put things right. The industrial landscape around us seemed to darken, and the fog began to thicken once more, obscuring the distant lights of the city. We were delving deeper into Mrs. Thorne's carefully constructed deceptions, each layer peeled back, revealing a more desperate truth. The lady who lied twice, it seemed, had many more untruths yet to be exposed. Chapter 5. Chronicles and Curios. Poirot's investigation into the mysterious wooden box and the Canterbury connection led us, on a rather brisk but clear morning, to the hallowed halls of the British Museum. The grand portico, an imposing testament to human knowledge, offered a stark contrast to the gritty docklands we had recently explored. Inside, the hushed reading room, filled with the rustle of turning pages and the quiet murmur of scholars, was a sanctuary of erudition. Ah, Hastings, the wisdom of the ages, neatly catalogued, Poirot whispered, as we settled at a large oak table. Here, facts are immutable, unlike the shifting sands of human testimony. Poirot's objective was to research the Thorne family history, specifically any mention of unusual heirlooms or forgotten wills that might shed light on Mrs. Rosalind Thorne's desperate circumstances. He consulted old parish records, archived aristocratic journals, and obscure genealogical texts. After an hour of meticulous scanning, a faint flicker of recognition crossed his face. "Voila, Hastings," he declared softly, tapping an entry in a century-old society gazette. The Thorne family, once quite prominent in Kent, suffered a considerable loss of fortune in the late 18th century, due to a scandal involving an ancestor who misappropriated funds. The gazette mentions a curious family relic, a small, intricately carved box, which was thought to have been lost or stolen during the upheaval. It was supposedly a gift from a Portuguese diplomat and was rumored to contain not jewels, but rather significant family documents. My eyes widened. So the box Grimshaw described is this very relic? And it might contain documents, not just air. Precisely, mon ami. Poirot's eyes gleamed with satisfaction. A curious relic that was thought to be lost, and Mrs. Thorne, knowing its true nature, tried to pass it off as a fake to Grimshaw. The plot thickens, does it not? She wasn't just hiding her financial state. She was trying to manipulate the value or the perception of the box. From the museum, our journey took us to a quiet, tucked-away antique shop in Bloomsbury, a place overflowing with dusty treasures and the scent of aged paper and wood. Mr. Elias Vance, the proprietor, was a diminutive man with a perpetually anxious expression and spectacles perched low on his nose. He was known for his extensive knowledge of obscure antiquities. "Mrs. Rosalind Thorne," Mr. Vance repeated, adjusting a pile of old maps. "Indeed, she visited me some weeks ago. She brought in a small wooden box, exquisitely carved. She inquired about its value, and I gave her a preliminary assessment. Quite significant, I might add, for a piece of its period and craftsmanship. But then, a week later, she returned, quite flustered. She said the box had been stolen from her, and she could no longer sell it. She seemed genuinely distressed." "Stolen?" I echoed, exchanging a glance with Poirot. "Yes, Captain," Vance confirmed, wringing his hands. "She was most insistent. Said she must have been careless, but I found it curious. Why would she come back to tell me it was stolen when she merely could have disappeared?" Poirot hummed a deep, thoughtful sound. "Indeed. A most curious detail. One does not usually announce a theft to a potential buyer unless there is a specific reason. Perhaps she wished to create a narrative, a plausible explanation for its disappearance." He leaned closer. "Did she mention anything of its contents or its history?" Vance shook his head. "Only that it was a family heirloom. But I always sensed she was holding something back. A secret, perhaps. There was an urgency about her, beneath the veneer of composure." Leaving the antique shop, the mid-afternoon sun had finally broken through the clouds, casting a golden glow on the old brickwork. Poirot's pace quickened, his mind clearly racing. "So, Hastings, the box was not a worthless fake, nor merely an empty vessel. It is a historical relic, renowned for containing crucial family documents. And Mrs. Thorne, she first tries to sell it, then declares it stolen. This theft is undoubtedly another fabrication, another layer to her deceit. She lied about its value, and then she lied about its disappearance." He stopped at a street corner, observing the passing horse-drawn carriages and pedestrians. Why create such an elaborate deception? To protect the contents, or to prevent someone else from claiming them? The journey to Canterbury, the family solicitor, putting things right. It all points to a legal matter of great import, directly tied to the documents within that box. But who would benefit from her believing it was stolen, or from its true contents remaining hidden? I pondered aloud. Poirot's eyes, usually so focused, now held a glint of something almost mischievous. "Ah, Hastings, that is the question, is it not? Someone who stood to gain from Mrs. Thorne's continued belief that the box was worthless, or that its contents should remain undiscovered. Someone who perhaps knew the true significance of the box, and what its documents might reveal. This stolen claim, it smacks of desperation, or perhaps a warning." He paused, a tiny, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips. "I believe, mon ami, that the lady who lied twice was not merely attempting to deceive us, but was, in her own way, trying to survive a truth she dared not speak. We must now ascertain who had the most to lose, should that truth ever come to light." Chapter 6. Echoes in the Ballroom. Our investigation led us, a few evenings later, into a dazzling, if somewhat superficial, world of London aristocracy, a grand ball hosted by Lady Beatrice Fairfax at her imposing Mayfair estate. The elegant mansion, ablaze with countless gaslights, exuded an air of refined opulence. Carriages lined the street, and liveried footmen bowed guests into a cavernous ballroom where chandeliers glittered, music swelled, and the air buzzed with polite conversation and the clinking of champagne glasses. Lady Beatrice, a distant cousin of the late Mrs. Rosalind Thorne, was a formidable woman of sharp wit and even sharper social ambition. She was the most likely inheritor of Mrs. Thorne's estate, especially if Rosalind had no direct heirs. "Poirot, my dear, and Captain Hastings, how utterly delightful to see you," Lady Fairfax declared, sweeping towards us in a gown of shimmering emerald silk. Her smile was cordial, though her eyes, as they flickered over Poirot, held a hint of wary curiosity. "I trust you are enjoying the festivities. Such a tragedy about poor Rosalind." We were never close, you understand, but family is family." "Indeed, Lady Fairfax," Poirot replied, bowing with customary grace. "We are, in fact, here on a matter concerning Mrs. Thorne's unfortunate demise. We understand you were one of her closest surviving relatives." Lady Fairfax sighed dramatically. "Alas, yes. Though, as I said, we had our differences. Rosaline could be quite secretive, always with her little mysteries. In fact, just a week before, she called upon me, said she had something important to tell me, a confession of sorts." Poirot's eyes narrowed imperceptibly. "A confession, Lady Fairfax? Of what nature?" "Oh, a rather fanciful tale, to be honest," she said, dismissively waving a gloved hand. "Something about a long-lost son, a secret will, and a significant family heirloom that would alter the course of our inheritance." She was quite agitated, claiming she had been a fool to keep it hidden for so long, but then, just as quickly, she dismissed it all as a foolish fantasy, a product of an overwrought mind. Said she'd been under a great deal of stress. She made me promise to forget she'd ever mentioned it. Utterly baffling, the woman. Poirot's gaze was unwavering. "And you believed her, Lady Fairfax? That it was merely a fantasy?" Lady Fairfax gave a tinkling laugh. "Well, what else was one to think? Rosalind was always prone to dramatics. Besides, she later sent a note reiterating that her confession had been a temporary delusion, and that her true intentions for her estate remained unchanged, as per her existing will." I sensed a chill in the air, despite the warmth of the ballroom. Rosalind Thorne had confessed her greatest secret, then immediately recanted, creating yet another layer of deceit. The lady who lied twice, even to her own family. Later, Poirot and I retreated to a secluded corner of the extensive, manicured garden, away from the glittering crowd. The night air was cool and crisp, carrying the distant strains of the orchestra. "Hastings, you perceive the pattern, yes?" Poirot murmured, gazing at the moonlit fountains. Mrs. Thorne was a woman ensnared by her own deceptions. She concealed her financial plight, lied about her whereabouts, feigned ignorance about the heirloom's true value, and then, most tragically, confessed a profound truth only to retract it, even to her closest relative. "But why recant, Poirot?" I asked, shivering slightly despite my heavy coat. "Why reveal such a bombshell and then deny it so vehemently?" "Perhaps to test the waters, mon ami," Poirot suggested, "to gauge Lady Fairfax's reaction. Or perhaps she was forced to retract it, fearing for her safety or the safety of another." He pulled out a small, crumpled note from his pocket, the very note Lady Fairfax had alluded to, which Poirot had subtly found amongst Mrs. Thorne's personal effects, overlooked by Japp. It was indeed written in Rosalind's hand, stating her earlier confession was a figment of stress. "This note, Hastings, it is dated the day before her death," Poirot stated, holding it up. "It is her final lie, a desperate attempt to undo a revelation. It tells me that the lost son and the secret will were very real indeed, and Lady Fairfax, who stood to lose everything, now claims she dismissed it as a fantasy. She had a clear motive to prevent that truth from ever seeing the light of day." He paused, his eyes glinting in the pale moonlight. "The heirloom box, the documents within, the journey to Canterbury to put things right with a solicitor, the young writer. All these threads lead to a single conclusion. Mrs. Rosalind Thorne had a son, an heir, whom she had given up for adoption years ago. She was preparing to acknowledge him and to validate a new will that would pass her estate to him, disinheriting Lady Fairfax. So Lady Fairfax knew of this, and yet pretends she dismissed it," I exclaimed, a sudden clarity washing over me. "Indeed," Poirot said, a grim set to his mouth. "She knew, and she chose to believe it a fantasy when it suited her. But Mrs. Thorne, in her agitation, mentioned it to others as well, however vaguely. The romantic folly Mr. Blackwood spoke of, the young writer at the tea-room, Mr. Philip Sterling. He is the son, Hastings. He is the reason for all the lies, all the deception. Rosalind was protecting him and trying to right a terrible wrong from her past. The music from the ballroom seemed to grow distant, muted by the cold air. The elegant facade of the Mayfair estate now felt sinister, concealing a truth as cold and hard as the marble statues in the garden. Poirot's gaze was fixed, not on the stars, but on the dark recesses of human avarice and deceit. The final act of this tragedy was about to unfold. Chapter 7. The Unveiling of Truth. The following morning, the grey London sky seemed to mirror the sombre gravity of the situation. Poirot had arranged for all the key players, Miss Evangeline Croft, Mr. Julian Blackwood, Mr. Silas Grimshaw, Mr. Elias Vance, Lady Beatrice Fairfax, and the young writer, Mr. Philip Sterling, to assemble in our Whitehaven Mansions flat. The small room, usually so orderly, felt charged with anticipation, a silent stage set for Poirot's grand reveal. Inspector Japp, looking thoroughly bewildered, sat quietly in a corner, notepad ready. Poirot, radiating his usual quiet authority, stood before the mantelpiece, his eyes sweeping over the nervous faces. "Mes amis," he began, his voice calm yet resonant. "We are here to speak of Mrs. Rosalind Thorne, a woman whose life was, to put it mildly, a tapestry of intricate falsehoods. The lady who lied twice, indeed lied many times over, but always, I assure you, for a single profound reason, to protect a truth she deemed too scandalous to reveal." He picked up the intricately carved wooden box, which he had retrieved from Mr. Grimshaw. This box, once dismissed by Mrs. Thorne as a fake, then declared stolen to Mr. Vance, is in fact a genuine and immensely valuable heirloom. It contains not jewels, but documents, specifically a later will drafted by Mrs. Thorne, dated only weeks before her death, which names her long-lost son, Mr. Philip Sterling, as her sole heir. This new will utterly superseded her previous will, which left everything to Lady Beatrice Fairfax. A gasp went through the room. Philip Sterling, pale and trembling, looked utterly stunned. Lady Fairfax, however, bristled, her face a mask of indignation. "Preposterous! Rosalind told me she had no son. She said her confession was a fantasy." "Ah, Lady Fairfax," Poirot said, his gaze fixed upon her, "that was her final, desperate lie to you. She had indeed given up Mr. Sterling for adoption many years ago, a secret she buried to protect her social standing and, later, to protect Mr. Sterling from scandal. Her journey to Canterbury was to finalize the legal proceedings with her solicitor, to formally acknowledge Mr. Sterling and authenticate the new will contained within this very box. He deftly pressed a hidden catch on the box, revealing a narrow, felt-lined compartment from which he extracted a rolled parchment. She was trying to put things right, as Mr. Grimshaw overheard. She also lied about her financial state, which Mr. Blackwood correctly surmised. She was, in fact, almost destitute and desperately needed to sell a part of her estate to support herself and her son, whom she had recently reconnected with. Poirot turned to Miss Croft. "The rare orchid you sold her, Miss Croft, was not for an art dealer. It was a prearranged signal, a discreet way for Mrs. Thorne to meet Mr. Sterling, the young writer, without drawing attention, as Clara, the waitress, observed." Then Poirot's gaze hardened as it fell upon Lady Fairfax. "You, Lady Fairfax, knew of this. Rosalind had confided in you, however briefly, about her son and the new will. Your dismissal of it as a fantasy was a calculated deception. You knew your inheritance was at stake. You also knew Mrs. Thorne was about to formalize this change with her solicitor in Canterbury, which would have made her new will incontrovertible." Lady Fairfax's face was now ashen. "This is outrageous. She was a delicate woman. It was a weak heart." "On the contrary," Poirot stated with quiet force. The almonds you smelt in her drawing-room, Hastings, were not from a natural cause. Mrs. Thorne was poisoned subtly and discreetly, with cyanide administered in her teacup. Not a large dose, but enough to induce a sudden collapse, mimicking heart failure. The metallic tang I detected was the lingering trace of this poison. You, Lady Fairfax, were present at Mrs. Thorne's house on the afternoon of her death. You offered her tea. You alone had the motive, the opportunity, and the knowledge to silence her before she could legally disinherit you. Lady Fairfax's composure finally shattered. She stammered, denying everything, but her eyes darted nervously toward the heirloom box, now open, its secret revealed. She had intended to retrieve the box, believing it contained financial documents that would simply confirm Rosalind's destitution, unaware of the actual new will inside. She had wanted to secure her inheritance by eliminating Rosalind and then destroying any evidence of her true intentions, never realizing the full extent of what the worthless box truly held. You believed that by silencing Rosalind and securing the worthless box, you would secure your inheritance. You thought that with her gone and the will undiscovered, the old will would stand. Poirot concluded, his voice filled with a quiet condemnation. But Mrs. Thorne, even in death, had one final truth to unveil. Jap, finally understanding the intricate web, moved swiftly to arrest Lady Fairfax, who collapsed onto a chair, weeping hysterically. Philip Sterling, still bewildered, could only stare at the box, a lifetime of secrets suddenly laid bare. As the commotion subsided and Jap led away a now shaking Lady Fairfax, Poirot turned to me, a faint, almost melancholic smile on his lips. So, Hastings, the lady who lied twice, and many times more, finally rests in truth. Her deceptions, born of a desperate desire to protect, ultimately led to her tragic end, and to the unveiling of a truth that had been hidden for far too long. The silence in the flat was heavy, broken only by the distant sounds of London life. Another mystery solved, another human drama played out. Thank you for joining us on this intricate journey through the labyrinth of